Hello, everyone. It's Linda from CSIS. We're just waiting for a few more people to log on. It's 1 p.m. right now, and we'll get started in probably just one more minute. I can just see that there are still a few more coming on. So just bear with us for just a second. So seeing that we are at 1 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As I said, my name is Linda Ryan, and I'm the Executive Director of the College Sector Employment Services, and we've coordinated these webinars. But our presenter today is Michelle from Sault College, and I'll let her take over in just a minute after we do some housekeeping. Just want to let you know that all of the attendees are in listen only mode, and that will remain the case during the course of the webinar. If there is a chat feature, and if you have a question, please use the chat feature to ask your question, and I will monitor that. Once we get going with the webinar, I will put myself on mute, but I will bring forward any questions as we're going to Michelle. I also wanted to let you know that this webinar will be recorded today, and we're hoping that the recording works out well and that we're able to put it on our CSIS website so that you can access it again, or others in your organization will be able to access it in the future. So having said all that, with our housekeeping now out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to Michelle from Sault College, who's going to do the presentation today. And Michelle, I'll let you take it over from here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Bach. I'm from Sault College Employment Solutions. I'm a youth worker with the Youth Job Connection program. Today, I'm going to be discussing Youth Job Connection and Indigenous focused pre-employment training, how we can incorporate culturally appropriate pre-employment training and provide better support for our Indigenous youth. So the topics that we're going to cover today include the rationale behind providing specialized pre-employment, planning for pre-employment delivery, program delivery, events and activities, next steps for participants and facilitators, additional information, and then we can open up to some questions. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released 94 calls to action and recommendations to assist with the continued and furthered reconciliation between Canada and Indigenous persons. Specifically, the government was called to action to develop with Indigenous groups a joint strategy to eliminate educational and employment gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous persons. Additionally, in 2018, Colleges Ontario released a framework addressing truth and reconciliation and how the college sector is set to respond to these calls to action. As service providers and members of the college sector, it is so important that we uphold our commitment to providing better support for Indigenous youth. On top of this, upholding our commitment to truth and reconciliation. We must provide opportunities and create connections for the Indigenous youth within our communities. While planning for pre-employment training, it is essential to connect with external agencies and community organizations. Understanding that sometimes we may not always be frontline or completely mindful of the needs of the youth that we are supporting. Having the ability to network and make connections is beneficial not only as a service provider, but will also allow you to best support your client needs. Understanding and knowing who your Indigenous community support agencies are. For example, do you have a localized First Nation community? Does your home college house an Indigenous Studies department? These are all networking opportunities that you will want to capitalize on to best plan and execute an Indigenous focused pre-employment training program properly and appropriately. These connections are going to best provide you with what the needs are of the group you are supporting. They can also assist to identify learning opportunities and culturally appropriate activities. Some of these supports and networking opportunities may include your local Niigaaniin or Indigenous Social Assistance Office. So these are social assistance agencies that are aimed towards providing support to Indigenous persons. They offer programs such as employment support and financial support. Additional resources that are able to assist in providing guidance and feedback are community elders, police services, band offices, Indigenous community leaders, and Indigenous business owners. The goal of outreaching is to identify what the barriers are that Indigenous youth within your community are currently facing. So this could also be an opportunity to identify mentorship opportunities for your clients as well. So if you notice the tobacco pouch that's pictured, this is a recommendation that was made by our incredible support agencies. Tobacco is one of the sacred medicines within the Indigenous culture. It's offered as a universal protocol when asking a request. So we offered these pouches to anybody that we asked to participate in any level of this program as a sign of our respect for their cultural practices. The most common barriers that were identified by our communities within the Sioux College District included lack of essential life skills training. So how does one maintain their activities of daily living? Mental health and addiction support, including accessing the appropriate referrals for service and where to get help. Transportation was a large barrier that was identified. How does one get to and from pre-employment training? And furthermore, how will one attend employment if it's outside of the regular city transit route or if transit is unavailable? Finally, access to proper, safe, and stable housing. Finding considerations were important to understand so we are able to work towards providing opportunities for our participants. So we can work with them to overcome their barriers and to provide individualized support. So when you are preparing to deliver your pre-employment training, you should begin to think about your current delivery program, your program delivery model. Does that model fit with the activities and events along with the barriers that your participants may be facing? So what are you able to adjust or change that best suit your participants while complementing the pre-employment training delivery? For example, if you are a site that tends to operate your YJC on more of an individualized or one-on-one basis, it could be helpful to move towards a group model, as this will create more of a community for the participants. During the outreach component, building the rapport and the relationship helps to have our external support agencies truly understand what the value is and the guidance that YJC can provide to their band members. So for us, this prompted an external agency to graciously provide transportation to and from pre-employment on a daily basis for our clients that were living out of city limits. So Sault College has completed 2 successful Indigenous focused pre-employment trainings thus far. And this is what we have found to be best practice in terms of our program delivery. So Sault College offered 10 days, 2 weeks of in-class program delivery, totaling 60 hours of the mandatory training. We are very fortunate that we were able to be housed at Sault College within their Indigenous Studies department. So this provided our participants with not only access to an Indigenous inclusive space, but also the supports and the staff that operate within that facility. We held our training from 9:30 a.m. until 2:30 p.m., totaling roughly 5 hours of in-class and activities per day. So the last hour of mandatory training daily was left for things like independent assignments, reflections, or preparation for the next day's activities. These would be submitted or discussed in a group the next morning. Beginning at 9:30 in the morning also allowed our participants to begin moving into a routine that would reflect a common work day. They were able to have access to breaks frequently to allow things like movement, mental reset, restroom, snacks, coffee, and those types of things. So following in accordance with pre-employment sub-goals, we know the following mandatory plan items are essential for program success, and that's the career development and exploration, employment-related skills, fundamental job readiness skills, personal management, job maintenance, and career advancement skills. So when we can understand each of these plan items, you're able to choose culturally appropriate activities that will support both the learning outcome and the cultural component of the pre-employment training. So we're going to look into how we can facilitate these while also focusing on engaging events and activities. So before we go into these events and activities, I want to include that while we are focusing on the culturally appropriate events and activities, each day should also include a mandatory pre-employment component, such as resume building, job searching, interviews. So starting each day or the beginning of a program with a smudge is an important tradition to uphold. It allows participants to engage, or in some cases re-engage, in a tradition of their culture that's meant to cleanse or purify their soul by smudging with sage or cedar or any other sacred medicines. Secondly, providing participants with the opportunity to review their 7 grandfather teachings will incorporate important aspects of their culture, but also can provide fundamental employment skills. Things like communication, problem solving, emotional intelligence. And lastly, as you'll see here, we have a wellness wheel. So the wellness wheel will allow participants to focus and learn and develop their personal management and life skills. As you can see here, it has 4 components. So it breaks down all parts of the being into these 4 components, and the participants are able to document how they care for each of those components. They're able to build ideas off of each other as well. Another great activity that we incorporated into the training was beading. So not only was beading a wonderful cultural tradition to learn, but it actually aided in some participants maintaining their focus for the remainder of the day for some of the more hard job-related skills. So having individuals come in and present on the beading process, showing their regalia, opening up the class, having participants bring in their beading work or their regalia, providing the opportunity to learn from each other. Participants beaded throughout the afternoon, so they were able to focus on that content, and they were also able to keep some fidgeting hands busy. Presentations, we all know, are a wonderful opportunity for learning and networking. Presenters are able to discuss things like career development and exploration, along with job attainment skills. They can provide valuable employer insight on the resume and the interview process. They can discuss their programs and services available to Indigenous persons. Presenters such as Indigenous initiatives for youth within your community, business owners, managers or human resource representatives, faculty, education, upgrading supports. It is no surprise that young people are food motivated. It's also no surprise that certain foods can trigger certain memories. So having a traditional Indigenous meal was something everyone enjoyed. We were very fortunate for this to be provided by our college's Indigenous Studies support staff. Having everybody sit around the table, eating, sharing stories about the memories and traditions that this food brought. This is something very common in Indigenous culture, and the participants are grateful to share this opportunity and grateful to have some food. So sharing circles and talking circles allow for participants to learn how to communicate effectively. Not only does each person have their chance to share, but they must also learn how to allow someone else to share without interrupting. This is such a strong skill that's used in the workforce that sometimes can be very difficult to teach or to instruct. So sharing circles allow this to happen naturally and allow participants to articulate thoughts and emotions. Next, go off-site. Get out of the classroom and learn. Visit Indigenous employers, tour their facilities. A good mentor will be open to having you visit and will work with you to create learning opportunities and engaging activities to generate excitement about working in young people. Visit cultural centers. This picture is from our local residential school center, where we toured the site of a previous residential school. These are some of our amazing participants who flipped through pages of archives for over an hour, finding pictures of family members and names of connections. This is the impact of Indigenous focused training. If you haven't participated, I strongly encourage you to participate in a blanket exercise. This is an interactive learning opportunity that teaches the history of Indigenous persons in Canada. Due to the nature of what Indigenous persons went through, it can be common that some of our youth have never learned in school or in their homes what has happened. This activity can be emotional, so having support available for participants and having a sharing circle to discuss feelings afterwards is very important. The string exercise is a way to discuss support and how with support we can be held up. This activity uses just a ball of yarn and a large ball, and by passing the ball of yarn and holding tight to each thread, each person can explain who and how they are supported in their life. By the end of this activity, you have a web of yarn that can withstand the pressure of a ball being thrown on top. Again, this helps to identify supports and shares opportunities for supports. The event that was most beneficial was the panel discussion and is still the panel discussion. So individuals that you could invite onto your panel may include Indigenous employers, business owners, police services, support services, elders, counselors, faculty. The premise is that all individuals sitting on the panel, as well as the Master of Ceremonies, are Indigenous. They can be provided some questions ahead of time, tailoring the questions for each panel member while also providing some general questions. Having your participants know who's sitting on that panel, so they're able to be provided the opportunity to generate some of their own questions that they would like to ask. Some examples of the panel questions that we put forward were things like, how has your personal journey and challenges guided you on the path of resiliency and professionalism? What is one thing you wish someone had told you as a youth that would be helpful for our youth in the YJC program to know? And what barriers do you see youth within your community struggling with? And what advice would you give them to overcome these barriers? The learning that came from these events surpassed anything that we could teach in a classroom. So participants learned that professionals and leaders and business owners have been through the same struggles they have, and they have learned how to work to success. So I do want to share just two pieces of feedback that we received from two of our panel members. So the first one says, I share to show that it can be accomplished, especially now with so many supports and how the world understands and sympathizes with this generation. In the 1970s, 80s, there were no supports for Indigenous people, so not many were successful. The second one says, miigwech for the opportunity to be a panelist last week as part of the YJC Indigenous initiative. Moving forward, if there is anything else we can do to support the work you're undertaking, just let me know. So closing out any pre-employment training, to me, is always so bittersweet and exciting. And by incorporating a closing ceremony into your Indigenous focused training, you have the opportunity to thank all of the participants and the people who have helped to make the program a success. Facilitated by an elder or an elder in residence allows the practice to be completed appropriately and effectively, providing the opportunity such as a sacred fire and providing offerings to that fire. Each participant and facilitator has the chance to make an offering of tobacco and cedar and to thank the spirits, providing a sharing circle to thank and reflect on the pre-employment training allows each person to essentially close this chapter and move forward into what is next. So what comes after the pre-employment training in order to provide the continued support and engagement for the participants. So things like increasing specialized training opportunities. Do some participants need specialized training to meet their employment goals? Do they need a certain certificate or a certain training? Providing hands-on learning activities. Would they benefit from a work experience placement or another type of hands-on training to develop skills? Continuous outreach and networking with community members in order to provide engaging speaking opportunities, in order to increase your toolbox of individuals to participate in the future. Facilitating supported job search efforts. So ensuring that your participants are maximizing their efforts and minimizing their discouragement. So this could be things like identifying opportunities with Indigenous employers for placement opportunities and opportunities within their communities. Creating connections with education and upgrading providers. So completing the service coordination, ensuring clients' educational goals are supported throughout the process. And providing mentorship opportunities for YJC participants through the connections and through the networking. So the last thing I would like to touch on are some additional items that are helpful to establishing an Indigenous focused group and maintaining the relationship with those participants. So as I had mentioned before, it is important to be incorporating a culturally engaging and appropriate activity into each day of pre-employment training. This helps to create a balance, and it engages but also retains their focus. So providing ongoing cultural support through the networking opportunities and the professional support services that you have identified. So this will mean continuously checking in and being up to date on programs and services from different external community agencies. Create a balance of soft skills and employment readiness skills. So both are so important for young job seekers, and they allow a full learning experience. Ensuring that your participants understand career advancement. So discussing education, discussing upgrading, training, skills, and working with them to create opportunities where they will be able to climb their own career ladder. Lastly, maintaining contact with participants, utilizing their means to communicate. That may be text, phone, email, Facebook, but allowing them to choose for how they prefer to be reached, making plans to connect with them, and following those plans. Thank you all, and miigwech for participating.
So at this point, we'll ask if there are any questions, if you could put them either in the chat feature or the question feature. Michelle, I actually did want to ask a question. I'm sorry if you covered this and I missed it, but did you actually have any Indigenous staff members as part of this project?
Within our own facility, or?
Yeah, within your YJC team.
We don't have any on site. We didn't have any Indigenous facilitators. However, we did bring in individuals to facilitate every part of the training that was Indigenous focused.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. And who did the smudging ceremony at the beginning of each of your sessions?
We both had an elder facilitate, but we've also just had the support staff at Sioux College facilitate this smudging session as well. We had the events coordinator, and we also had the student success coordinator as well come in and do a smudge for us.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. You had mentioned during your presentation the tour of the residential school archives. And
Yes.
I'm wondering, and you mentioned that folks were able to look up, you know, information about their families. And I'm just wondering how, you said that that was very well received. And I wondered if during those that tour, if it became emotional at all.
Absolutely. Not only just for the participants, but it became emotional for the facilitators as well. And the school center that we toured had wonderful support available as well for the participants. The tour started out with a residential school survivor speaking and sharing his story, which was definitely very, very emotional, but the staff at the center were very receptive to catching on to emotions and working it through if it needed to be.
Great. Well, seeing no other questions, I do want to ask Michelle if we could just get your email address before you sign off in case folks do have questions.
Absolutely. I am very happy to answer any questions. My email address is michelle.bock, B-O-C-K, at siouxcollege.ca. And I'll also just write it in the chat here as well.
And if you don't catch that, you can always ask your manager to reach out to me. I'm Linda Ryan, and they all have my email address through the CSIS organization as well. So Michelle, thank you so much. That was really informative, and I hope that some of our attendees will maybe consider this as an opportunity to consider a YJC Indigenous group in their particular colleges. And I think the information that you shared today, Michelle, was invaluable. So thank you everyone for attending, and we'll sign off until the next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.